Welcome to the Regista Room, the podcast where soccer goes off field. Here's your host, Paul Varian.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Regista Room where amateur soccer goes off field. It's been a while, but Paul Varian is here, back, and glad to be with you as always. And I hope the first quarter of 2024 has been good to you and your soccer organization. And whatever the ambitions and challenges are for your organization, you most likely have revenue at or near the top of the list, because there's just never enough money, is there, folks? And it seems to be getting harder and harder to find, especially without endless strings attached. Pressure to keep registration fees low and affordable, particularly in the current cost of living crisis, means most sports clubs cannot cover the growing costs of program delivery, and they must find other revenue lines to cover the revenue gap. Indeed, the extensive research I carried out to develop the 2022 Canadian Amateur Sport Health Check report, which is available at Capitus Learning if you want to take a look, shows almost 2/3 of Canadian amateur sport organisations run their operations at either a deficit or a break-even. So that means other revenue must be propping these organisations up financially. Some of this revenue comes from government grants or other revenue lines like hosting tournaments and such, but some of it also comes from the topic of this episode of the Regista Room, non-fee-based revenue generation. So no, we're not going to talk about fee-based revenue, which is the revenue you get from your soccer programs that you create and sell. Registration fees as such. Amateur sport generally does a pretty good job on this front, but the problem is, generally speaking, this is the only significant revenue line that amateur soccer clubs have. Fee-based revenue, as it's called, should be generating about 60 to 70% of your revenue mix if you want to manage financial risk well. But amateur soccer clubs I see generally have fee-based revenue making up 85 or even up to 95% of their revenue, which makes them wholly reliant on the people who consume their programs. So, in this episode of the Regista Room, we're going to tackle the issue of non-fee-based revenue, and we're specifically going to look at revenue that comes from corporate sponsorship and philanthropic fundraising through development of sustainable, what we call social capital. That's to say, all of the capital that's in our volunteers and community waiting to be unlocked in the form of volunteer hours, donation-based funding, and earned media and marketing value. The latter, philanthropic fund development, is generally done very poorly by amateur sport at large, particularly in a structured whole-of-organisation way. And corporate sponsorships often waved to as the generic solution to all revenue problems. So often I hear utterly financially impossible ideas that are put forward in sport, solved with the motherhood statement of just find a sponsor. It sounds easy enough, right? But of course it's not. Sponsorship is not a matter of rocking up to big shiny corporations, asking for cash because you need it, and expecting them to pull a big red lever that releases fluttering bills galore. It starts with how amateur sport actually sees itself in the transaction that is a sponsorship deal. So let's go back again to the 2022 Canadian Amateur Sport Health Check report. Has some pretty revealing section there in it on amateur sports sponsorship. According to the report, amateur sport is remarkably inactive and underproductive in harnessing corporate sponsorship. 42% of sport organizations don't have any corporate sponsors, and those that do, nearly half source them through their parent groups or participants in their programs itself. Most are local small to medium-sized enterprises, notably in the food, bar, restaurant and retail sectors. According to the 15th annual Canadian Sponsorship Landscape Report in 2021, not by me, but by another group, amateur sports share of the overall Canadian sponsorship market has been stagnant for the last 10 years and accounts for only 21% of the market in 2020. Given amateur sports is a $19 billion industry in North America, by comparison, folks, the NHL is only $5 billion. Those are pretty extraordinary figures. Surely an industry of amateur sports size, with the enormous collective buying power at community level, should be bossing the sponsorship market, not tailing in as a relative bit player. Well, In my experience, there are 3 reasons for amateur sports' relative failure in all non-fee-based revenue lines, not just corporate sponsorship. And if you're a regular listener to this podcast, they will be familiar to you. 1, lack of resources to do it. Number 2, a lack of understanding of how to do it. And 3, importantly, lack of prioritization of it ahead of other sporting matters. But generating fee-based revenue can be mastered, and those amateur sport organizations that do enjoy discretionary revenues and all sorts of activation benefits from their sponsors and donors that are like gold dust in an industry that is routinely starved of resources, especially free-to-use cash. In this episode of the Regista Room, we're going to bring to you a great case study of an amateur soccer club that is doing great things in sponsorship, recruitment and retention. We're also going to hear from an organisation that has made it their business to raise sponsorship for amateur sport clubs in Canada, allowing clubs to outsource this function and focus on their core sport business instead. And finally, we're going to hear from an expert in sport fundraising, who has also established a service provider consultancy that helps sport organisations set up fund development programs and keeps them simple and easy to implement, and importantly, sustainable. All this and more coming away after the break on the Regista Room, where amateur soccer goes off-field. Join me in a minute.
Are you an amateur sport leader looking for quality professional development? If so, your search is over. Introducing Capitus Consulting's new sport business tutorial series. We'll teach you what you need to do to run your club better. These tutorials target the key areas of sport business: governance, risk, planning, marketing, technical oversight, sponsorship, and modern volunteerism. Access and enjoy these tutorials when you want and where you want.
Go to capituslearning.com
and get learning with me today.
Do you have a story to tell? The Regista Room is built on real-world stories and experiences from amateur soccer clubs everywhere that we can explore, discuss, and learn from. Have you innovated a solution to a problem, challenged the norm, tried something different, thought outside the box, or taken a risk, and it's paid off? If so, we want to hear from you on the Regista Room. Contact us today with your story at content@registaroom.com, and let's better the game with our shared soccer experiences.
So before we bring in our first speaker, a reminder that presenting, selling and fulfilling sponsorship is a skill that needs to be trained. No, you don't need an MBA, but you do need to understand exactly what it is you're selling in sponsorship, how your prospective sponsor thinks and evaluates what you are offering, and the process to present, negotiate and close a deal. Handing this responsibility to an already overworked and untrained sports administrator will simply fail and may ruin your reputation in your local business market while you're at it. Over 20 years ago, I managed to break into the sports industry through my expertise and experience in corporate sponsorship sales. And recently, I've developed an online tutorial called How to Raise Amateur Sports Sponsorship, catchy title, eh? That brings you through the nuts and bolts of sports sponsorship, from understanding how a sponsorship transaction works, right through to a walkthrough of steps to pitch and close a deal. It's one of the few pieces of sponsorship sales training that's geared specifically to amateur sports sponsorship, and it's just $40 Canadian for a week-long rental that you can watch as many times as you like during your rental period with multiple members of your team. So check out the trailer for it at capituslearning.com, scroll down to eTutorials and rent it to watch when you want, wherever you want. And while you're at capituslearning.com, also check out the reports section, and you can download the 2022 Canadian Amateur Sport Health Check Report, which will give you great sport diagnostics, including market rates for sponsorship packages, salary information for sponsorship professionals if you want to get somebody to do this for you, and what industries are most sponsorable in the Canadian market. Also just $40, yours to download with the click of a button. Okay, now we've equipped you with what you need to be a crack sponsorship pro. Let's hear from some of the best in this industry, on both sides of the sponsorship transaction and one who brokers in between. Our first guest is a return guest to the Regista Room based on popular demand. Last year, James Peterson from Seacoast Soccer Club spoke about innovations his club were putting in place to combat the COVID-19 global pandemic, But it also so happens he's got a best-in-class sponsorship program running at Seacoast that we had to bring him back to talk about. Have a listen. James, welcome to the Regista Room.
Hey, Paul, how you doing? Really appreciate you extending this invite to be a part of the podcast, and great opportunity to showcase some of the things that we're doing, and hopefully it'll resonate with some people and maybe empower them to go on and do the same with their own organization.
I don't really need to sort of ask how seriously you take corporate sponsorship and corporate partnerships at your organization when I see that yourself and the title that you have there and the resources you put to it. But I counted up on your website 83 corporate sponsors, and that's just the logos I could count. So that's an incredible number of sponsors to actually bring in, not only to acquire, but to service. Can you give us a little bit of a background as to how you built such an enormous program and how you go about servicing such a big group of organizations?
I would definitely say our catchment of businesses has certainly grown more so organically, at least since I've been at Seacoast, because our club's grown. So we operate out of Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts. We're a multi-sport club. So we have a pretty significant footprint. And with that, obviously, we were able to get in front of various businesses, whether they're hyper-local or multinational. And, with that, I've been able to connect with people, within our communities. New England's pretty unique. I'm from Florida, originally born and raised, so I'm completely different than New England. And New England definitely has this whole, hyper local, support local mentality, which I think lends itself to a lot of the businesses that we've partnered up with. We right now we have 115 companies that are actively involved with Seacoast United through our business network, and I would say conservatively, probably 75% of them are either local or regional. And that's what we like to do. We like to interact with the people that we're, going out and eating at their respective restaurant, working with said company to do HVAC service at the house kind of thing. So there is definitely a genuine connection there, which I think obviously our business network's kind of a testament to that. We're supporting and working with people that are supporting and working with us.
That's a really interesting point you make there, James, because I think a lot of people I speak to around sponsorship, they assume that you have to go after big Fortune 500 companies, and they ignore local business community that may have smaller budgets, but they're looking for really important value-adding local opportunities. They don't want broad-scale media. They want local kids to eat in their local restaurant or use their services. It sounds like you are very effective at targeting those smaller, medium-sized enterprises that are very local to your operations.
Yeah, so you're spot on, because reaching out to these bigger national and multinational companies, and no disrespect to them, I mean, I'm sure anyone would welcome the opportunity to have them, support them in some capacity, but it takes time to foster that. You could speak to, reach out to some big box store, and it takes you 6 months to actually figure out who the appropriate person is to speak to. And then by the time you put something together, you spent 6 months trying to have or initiate a conversation with them. And, with all due respect, usually they don't know you from Adam kind of thing. So that reverts back to that whole approach about what we do. And that's something I really try to stress to anyone that I speak to when it comes to, sponsorships, facilitating partnerships and whatnot. It is having a genuine connection with someone. It's getting said group to really believe in what you're doing as an organization. And at the same token, us as an organization doing everything that we can to use our platform to support these people. And again, that's going to resonate a lot of times with these, smaller businesses, smaller companies, because they're extremely reliant on, the influx of people that we're bringing to the area when we have tournaments and events and things to that extent. And, we're trying to come up with creative ways of driving those people to these businesses, because it's, you look at something like during the winter, we in March, we historically run 4 consecutive outdoor soccer tournaments in New Hampshire. So if anyone wants to know what the winter's like in New Hampshire and you're playing outdoor soccer, I can assure you, especially as a Floridian, it's it's cold. And if you look at a lot of the businesses here in the Seacoast area, so obviously we're an hour north of Boston, right next to the ocean. Well, everyone and their mother's up in the mountains skiing during that time, so no one's on the Seacoast. So, some of the things that we work on over the course of that month, there's restaurants and local businesses that, that's helped them get through that period, get through those hard months before the spring and the summer months return, and, the tourism returns to this area. So that's just one example of us trying to think beyond, this whole like transactional approach. And again, that stems from us actually having a genuine connection with these people. We're finding out, what are your growing pains? How can we support you? How can we help you? Yeah.
Yeah, and that brings me to my next question very well, which is, I'm interested to see how you built your inventory, because your asset inventory, because there's usually a common perception, at least in soccer, that the only asset you have is the front jersey of the kid, and the value you can drive is just multiplied by the number of kids you have. So if I have 200 kids in my club and another club beside me has 2,000, they can get 10 times more money than I can. When, it sounds like you're thinking much more deeply about identifying and, what value means to your sponsorship prospect, and then building an asset base around them that matches them, which takes more work, but is more effective, right? How have you built your asset base so that you can capture such a high number of organizations?
Yeah, and obviously, taking into consideration the audience that's listening to this, I have no problem saying Seacoast is very much an anomaly. We have 11 facilities across 3 states, whereas 99% of all other groups don't even have one facility. They're utilizing a local community park or things to that extent. So that's where I would even like kind of steer this towards that individual and say, look at what you have, which is predominantly families and community members that are affiliated with your program, and that's who said business wants to engage with. So let's remove the obvious. If you don't have a facility, yep, fair enough. So you can make an argument. We can't do physical signage. We can't do banners. We can't do goal wraps. Well, you look at where you're training, where you're playing. I would imagine almost every group is running some sort of tournament or event or something to that extent. One of the things that has been a huge hit for our business partners is giving them on-site activation at our events. Yeah, having the ability to come and be on site and do really whatever they want within reason. But the whole notion of establishing kind of that in-person connection and engagement, and I really try to convey to our partners, come up for 2 hours from 11 to 1 on a Saturday when we've got our town travel jamboree, and you're going to have the opportunity to engage with every town within a 50-mile radius, which is your target audience. And you can do whatever you want. If you want to do a raffle for Red Sox tickets, if you want to hand out tchotchkes, you name it. But it's a great opportunity for you to have a conversation with someone and for them to get to know you and vice versa. And, that's one facet of a multitude of things that we're doing. But, even something as simple as that, when I go back to points where people have raised to me, we don't have a facility, so we couldn't do that. It's like, yeah, no, I appreciate that. So think about, creative ways in which you can, allow your partners to get in front of these families, because that's going to create tremendous value for your families and add to the overall experience and atmosphere of that event. And at the same token, it's great for these sponsors to see the scale of people that are involved in your organization.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you mentioned that piece at the end there, because I think there's sometimes a propensity for people to think, we let our sponsors on site, they're going to be hard selling people, or it's going to make our events overly commercial or what have you. But the fact of the matter is, particularly if sponsors have product placement opportunities or products geared to young families, the families want that stuff. So, you can have, if they can make contributions to the halftime snacks, and which the parents don't have to pay for, or provide, all sorts of opportunities to engage in product experiences and make a soccer game into more sort of a carnival type atmosphere with all sorts of experiences they wouldn't normally get. That's not just activation for your sponsor, that's value for the parent group, right?
No, so again, you're nailed on, because so case in point, next month, so we have a number of tournaments that will be taking place in August prior to the fall season. Again, one of them being that town travel jamboree, which technically has nothing to do with Seacoast United. It's all the community programs within proximity to one of our complexes, and we host the event. All of us as coaches, we actually act as the officials and the refs for the game. We're actually going to do like a little education block, if you will. So we're going to have a number of our partners in the education sector, whether it's Sylvan Learning, Strategies for College, and Sperica, et cetera. They're just going to have a presence there, and kind of, again, add a bit of value and resource to those families as they start to get back into the back to school mode. And it's like, oh, okay, I've always wanted to speak to them, and I never thought about it. I'll go and have a chat, kind of thing.
Sponsorship these days is not just a transactional sale. You give me a check and I'll put your logo on this jersey, right? It's a lot more experiential than that. What's the secret to it? I mean, you mentioned getting to know your sponsors more, and maybe your potential sponsors are in the parent groups watching the kids right now. They may have a kid in the game, right? Is that where you go first to look for potential sponsors? The very people who you may overlook, but are actually part of the program?
Yeah, so two things. One, our founder and president, Paul Willis, for Seacoast United Sports Club, he has this great approach to how we go, which I think is applicable to every interaction in business, regardless if you're trying to do sponsorships or what have you. But it goes sponsorship, partnership, relationship, friendship, right? So sponsorship, anyone can get a sponsorship. So I'll fight someone till I'm blue in the face. Anyone can go out and get a sponsorship. Hey, we're so-and-so group, put your banner up on our fence. Thank you very much. And then in 12 months time, I'll reach back out to you when it's time to renew. And said company goes, oh, okay, well, that's nice. I haven't heard from you in 12 months, but right. Okay, yeah, since you're with kids, I'll consider it, kind of thing. So, again, our approach and our philosophy is very much, we want to establish that sponsorship, and over time, hopefully that develops into a partnership. And again, because we have that connection with people, because we're interacting with them on a consistent basis, naturally it evolves into a relationship. And I know it sounds cheesy, Hallmark, what have you, but the amount of businesses that are involved with us that we have genuine friendships with, because we've been with them for, I've been at Seacoast for 8 years now, and I'd say out of those 115 companies that we've onboarded as partners, we operate on like an 80% renewal rate. Wow, annually. That's
amazing.
And a lot of them, I have no problem saying they're friends. If they need something, they'll call me up, and it's like, yeah, I'll help you out how best I can, and that's reciprocated. The same token. So that's one approach. That's one point I wanted to make. The word partnership and relationships is lost on so many people in business. So that's one piece. The other one about looking. I did a presentation with Massachusetts Youth Soccer 2 years ago. And kind of similar audience, all community clubs and smaller clubs. And I kind of said, your first thing right off the bat. So my first ever email that I sent at Seacoast United, it was July 19, 2013. I didn't know anyone from Adam. And I sent an email out to our entire staff, and I said, by Friday, I need you to let me know the 3 restaurants that you go to, the 3, breweries that you go to. And I spent the next month just ringing every single one of those places. And I said, listen, so my staff, I can't keep them out of your place. They love it. I go, by the way, how can we come up with some ways to replicate that on a consistent basis over the course of the year? So what I kind of conveyed to the group at the Mass Youth Soccer was, before you even start thinking about cold calling and doing this, doing that, you have such a tremendous resource of people that are directly involved with your organization. And hopefully, if you have a good relationship with your parents and your families and your community members, those people will do anything for you because they believe in what you're doing as an organization.
Yeah.
So I said my pecking order was speak to your staff, whether that's your coaches, if you have a board, speak to your board members because usually they're all involved with a company. That was the first order. Again, approach them and say, are you involved with the business? Do you what's some places you think I should reach out to that would align with who we are as an organization? And then the next one was sending out an email to your families and saying, listen, we're working on some initiatives to help kind of, make our club more sustainable, help us grow and, bring on more staff, provide more programming, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of the things that we're doing, we believe are going to have a tremendous impact with, local businesses, the local economy. Are you either involved with a business or do you know someone that you think would be interested in learning? Because we'd love to have a conversation with them. So that's something that really doesn't take a lot of time in terms of at least putting that out there, and you'll get so much information back that's a great start. And then you look at that list of companies and businesses. You're not lying when you're reaching out to them and saying, hey, I had a parent in the club that was raving about you guys, and they said I should absolutely speak to you about ways in which we can partner together. Do you want to get together over a coffee? You let me know, but I'd love to work with you. I mean, that's genuine. There's a connection there. And to your point at the beginning of the podcast, people, when they think sponsorships, they're thinking these big names, and it's like, and it's like, you can get to that once you've established yourself, but you've got such a wealth of people that are in your community. Why aren't you reaching out to them?
And a funny story, James, sometimes sitting on your sideline can be those big decision makers in those big Fortune 500. I remember when I was at Oakville Soccer, there's a very big Fortune 500 company that has a major operation in Oakville. Anyone from Oakville listening to this will know exactly who I'm referring to. And at the club, we had never managed to break into them. And it was amazing. We thought it would be easy because they're based there and we're a big soccer club. And we could never get into them. Then what it took the new president who came into town, put her kid into our club. She was a day late in the registration. We managed to scramble away to get the kid in. And from that, we did a 6-digit sponsorship because she was actually materially involved in the club now, the president. It took that human connection to actually get through it. And, it's really interesting to hear you talk about how you just work the contacts that are in front of you that have an interest in seeing the club succeed, that may not be big, sparkly, global brands, but they're businesses and they have resources and you can provide value to them. So start there. Makes complete sense. What would you say, James, really, because I know there's probably a lot of people listening to this who are part of smaller organizations and they look wistfully at having a marketing, sales and advertising director and staff resources to commit to this. They may have, they may not even have an executive director. They may have a very small staff that are focused on program management and so on. And it may even be volunteers looking at this. What would you say to those smaller clubs that would say, well, we could never do this. It's out of our reach.
Again, I don't mean to be, rose tinted glasses, but anyone that says they can't do it, I'll tell them they're wrong. Because people out there, I believe that people want to support people, and especially ones that they believe in. And I'm also a firm believer, if you don't ask, you don't get. And it amazes me how reserved and hesitant people are to ask the question. And it's amazing to think, I look at our industry coaching. So I coach, but I look at all our coaches. We have coaches that are far more experienced, far better than I'll ever be. And when they're in their element and they're on the touchline and they're doing this completely unfazed. But if you take them out of that and they've got to speak in front of a group or pick up a phone and speak to someone, it's amazing. It's amazing to see how uncomfortable they are at times, and and not prepared to ask that question. So I can appreciate people are wired differently. And my biggest thing is I always try to get across is, we work in youth sports. We make a difference in people's lives. There's no two ways about it. Especially, I'm hopeful everyone's in it for the right reason and in terms of, providing opportunities. But, we actually changed our mission statement at the beginning of this year because we've evolved so much as a club in terms of being multi-sport and all the initiatives that we do off the field now, whether it's with the career fairs and, mental health training and walking soccer for the elderly, you name it. We're working on some pretty meaningful things now that transcend sport. So our whole mission statement now is making a difference in people's lives, both on and off the field. And I think sometimes that people forget that, whether they're involved with their own respective organization or, whatnot. And it's like, if all you got to do is have that, have the ability to reach out to someone, pick up the phone, drop in and introduce yourself. People want to hear about what you're doing. I believe in that. I'm fortunate enough I work in youth sports, and it's one of, it's so cliche about if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. But I love what I do, and I love telling people about what I do because people think it's cool. People think it's meaningful. They want to hear about it. And again, I know it's a simplistic view, but I fully believe that people want to support good people and good organizations. And if you're doing things right, you'd be amazed at how much people want to see you succeed. I genuinely believe that.
You're absolutely right. I had the chance to see it on the other side of the desk once when I was doing a marketing strategy for a private school in a community. And of course, they needed to get to the families of young kids. And it was hard to get to them without spending a lot of money on sort of unearned media buys. And the local sports clubs were just the perfect channel. But none of the clubs had ever contacted them. And they were a big, wealthy private school with budget, and they'd never been contacted, which I found really surprising. And I think it was because just what you've outlined, people sort of fear the ask. They don't fully understand the value they're bringing, and they don't understand the desire for community to get in and help. Whether it's altruistic or business-minded stuff, there is a real value in that connection both ways. I guess final question, James, before I let you go. There's one piece of advice you could give other amateur soccer clubs in doing this and doing this well. What would you say?
I'll actually take this from someone else. There's a gentleman, Scott Wallitson, who's with NC Fusion.
Yeah, I love him.
And we fully subscribe to it, and he said it during his presentation a couple years ago. But he said, the work starts once you actually bring someone on board. Mm-hmm. So everyone thinks, I finally got that person to sponsor us. Brilliant. And then, like I touched on earlier, you don't speak to them for 12 months, and then you have the audacity to reach out to them, like, hey, it's time to renew. And the person's like, that's great. I haven't heard a peep from you. So it's one of those, like, once you bring someone on board, it's all relative. That's in any walk of business is, retention of customers and keeping people on board. It costs more money to bring new ones on than it does to keep them. So it's one of those, it's easy to say that because I like speaking to people. I like talking to people. I like helping people. So that's, I guess it's twofold. One, the work starts once you bring someone on board, but then it's like looking at your club and the personalities that you have there. Who are the people that, do a really good job of, the Pied Piper of your organization, if you will. And they have a great network and they're well connected and they're likable. Those are the people that, you want kind of representing your organization. And
Yeah, it's so true what you say about, I say it in Don't Blame the Soccer Parents in my book when we talk about sponsorship. The truest measure of success in this space is renewal rate, right? Because at the end of the day, that is the clearest indication of satisfaction you'll get from your sponsors, that they want to come back. And I see a lot of sports organizations out there that put resources into sponsor acquisition. They think that's it. Once they get the check in their hand, that's it. It's done. But as you and Scott quite rightly say, that starts. You then got to do what you said you were going to do. And there's nothing more bigger waste of money than taking all of this time to acquire a sponsor, which is the most expensive piece of the process, and then not bother to fulfill and lose them after 1 year, right? That's just almost, that's terrible. I mean, if you're doing 80% plus, James, that's phenomenal. That's really, really good. So really impressive. We could talk all day, my friend, but I know you've got work to do and sponsors to acquire and sponsors to service. And I can't thank you enough for being on the Regista Room today. My guest today, James Peterson, Marketing, Sales and Advertising Director for the great Seacoast United in New England, US of A. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Paul.
How does your amateur sport organization measure up post-pandemic? Need to know? Capitalist Consulting is proud to bring you the Canadian Amateur Sport Health Check, the first comprehensive study of the Canadian amateur sport industry at community level, examining how it was before the pandemic and how it looks now. Built on data from hundreds of organizations just like yours, this report helps you measure your organization's recovery from the pandemic against others across the country. Participation rates, volunteer levels, sponsorship valuations, program fees and costs, and staff salary levels that give you market rates for sport job positions you simply can't find anywhere else. It's all here and much more. The Canadian Amateur Sport Health Check. Get your copy today at capitalistlearning.com.
Imagine not having the chance to play sports as a kid. Imagine not having those memories, those experiences. Imagine your childhood without them.
If I wasn't able to play, I would have missed my friends. I would miss being active and the chance of being competitive. Basketball has taught me how to work as a team, how to communicate, and how to adapt to any situation. My goal is to play for Team Canada and make it to the WNBA.
The skills kids learn through sports are carried with them throughout their lives. But all across Canada, kids are being left on the sidelines because they don't have the resources to play. We owe all kids a chance to experience everything that sport has to offer. Help unleash the full potential in every child. Visit kidsport.ca so all kids can play.
Our next guest is a former amateur soccer executive leader who in recent years has made the bold move to strike out and make corporate sponsorship in amateur sports his complete business. Ted Gendron has a career in amateur sport in Ontario, including the role of Executive Director of Guelph Soccer Club, and is now president of Kidspired Media, which is a boutique marketing firm specialising in harnessing corporate sponsorship revenue for amateur sports clubs. Employing the skills he acquired securing sponsorship in his management career, many amateur soccer clubs in Ontario now successfully outsource their corporate sponsorship programs to Kidspired, who source the sponsors, establish the sponsorship arrangements, and collect the revenue. Literally all the clubs have to do is manage the sponsor activation and collect a royalty check. Sounds fantastic. I caught up with Ted recently to discuss all things sports sponsorship with him, and in particular how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted, or maybe not, the sports sponsorship business in a sustained way. Have a listen. Ted Gendron, CEO of Kidspired Media. Thank you so much for joining me in the Regista Room today.
Happy to be here, Paul.
Well, it's great to speak with you, Ted. And, we've a lot to talk about because we want to talk about this whole area of corporate sponsorship, particularly in the amateur sport business. And I really must commend you as to what you've done at Kidspired, because you've managed to go out and provide this really fantastic sort of, it's almost like a brokerage, isn't it? But this interface between amateur sports clubs and the corporate sector, whether it's small business locally or larger business, and really help connect the two. So maybe you can just give me a little bit of an introduction as to, well, what sort of drove you to launch Kidspired, and how's it worked for you over the last few years?
Yeah, no, great question, and we get that often. I have spent my entire life sort of in and around sport, and I've been lucky to work in sport for most of my life too. So, you see the opportunities that are out there, and I really wanted to I didn't want to sell widgets anymore. I didn't want to be sort of just doing something that didn't have value. And so I thought I know the sport has given me so much. I want to do something that's going to give back to sport. So that's really the impetus behind Kidspired. And having worked with local club sports, I was able to see firsthand the challenges that clubs encounter. And also having some sales skill, talking to clients and really understanding what it is that they're looking for and how we can connect them to a club. So at the end of the day, we just want to put as much money back into minor sport as possible with as little cost to the club. They don't really pay us to this, and value too. It's the money is important, but things like Player of the Game awards and Players of the Month. I think back to when you played sport, and it was those things that you remember. The fact that your coach said, "Hey, great job, Paul. Here you go, bud," and we want to give that to the sport clubs as well. So that's kind of the Coles notes of kind of why we're doing what we're doing.
So great idea, but pretty bold of you to go out and do it, because I mean, everyone has this idea of, sport should connect better with business, but very often it doesn't get done. What drove you to really take the leap of faith and go, look, I'm actually gonna run a business doing this?
Yeah, I think it was, I spent time, I was the executive director of Guelph Soccer for 3.5 years, and I was able to see firsthand, what the opportunity was out there and how challenging it is for any minor sport club, whether they have staff or no staff, to actually have the time to connect with sponsors. So, but there is an appetite for local business and corporate business to connect. And I did see that too. I would have folks in the sponsorship world contact me and say, "Hey, I'm representing Eastside Mario's. We'd like to sponsor a few teams." I'm like, "Great, we'll take the money." And then they're gone the next year. So what I wanted to do was really having run an organization, I want to be a part of the organization. I want to say, hand the ball to us, think of us as your sponsorship arm. We're going to do the best we can. There's no miracles here, but we're going to be able to raise the bar year after year and have an amount of money you can count on. And then of course the value add. So I was able to see some of that firsthand while I was in Guelph, what's possible. I think at the end of the day too, for sponsors, I know we talked about this briefly, prior to starting, it's the value for sponsors. So it's no longer just sponsoring one team of 18 kids. It's how can we connect them to really minor sport in their community as a whole. So it's all to the benefit of our partners, but we have multiple partners. We have almost 100 partners right now with minor sport clubs. And when we talk to a sponsor, they don't just get that club, they get the entire audience. And I think that's what's going to keep them coming back to minor sport. It really is a media opportunity for them. And there's so much value in connecting to your community, especially post-COVID, right? I mean, you think about, I said to my team, this is a time when everybody should want to sponsor. They should want to get back and say to the community, I care about you guys, and I'm sponsoring 3 teams, and I'll see you on the field, right? So that's kind of how we look at it. Yeah.
So nice segue into my sort of next question is, like, from your experience, and obviously no one sponsor is the same as the next, but if you were to speak to your corporate clients, like, what is it that they see that's of value in amateur sport, like compared to other properties that might be available to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, everybody, as you say, has a different goal in mind. But if I look at sort of the average local sponsor, let's start there. It's a way to connect. So you sponsor a team, we give them a copy of the schedule, they go to the field, they meet the parents, they meet the kids. It feels good to say, you know what, my logo's on your jersey and I'm making a difference in this community. And Paul, you're no different. Yeah, I can see the Capitus Consulting jersey in the background. You understand the value too, right? So it's one of those things where it gives them a chance to give back to the community. But the one thing that we often say to sponsors, like if we walk through the front door and they say, hey, listen, I've already donated this year, we say, great, we're not looking for a donation. This is an opportunity for you to connect to your community. So I think community connection is a big part of it. And you can actually, at the local level, because we give them access to thousands of families, not 18 families, they can actually generate revenue for their business. So we have things like Player of the Game awards that invite the child in for a free slice of pizza. And, no 7-year-old walks into a restaurant by themselves. So mom and dad will come and purchase something. So it's pretty simple marketing that way. Yeah. But it's really just trying to think outside the box. And I think the biggest part, Paul, is just the time. When you're working as an ED or a marketing person at a club, if they're lucky to have one, there's so many other things going on. You really can't you can't do this on the side of your desk. It has to be what you do. 100%. So for my team, it's what we do all the time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, it is a skill too, but it's a commitment. There's no question. And it's funny you mentioned the sort of the jersey behind me here with the Capitals logo on it, which is a sponsorship of my local soccer club. And do you know the reason I sponsored, Ted? They asked me.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
They asked me. It's as simple as that. Like, I mean, nobody sponsors if they're not asked, right? And sometimes it's just a matter of getting out there. And you mentioned the feel good. Yeah, it felt great to have my logo there, watching my kids running around. And there's maybe less sort of direct business development motivation for me than other organizations. But do you think we sort of undervalue the importance of just being part of our community, particularly if you're a small business?
100%. I think it is. There's certainly a branding element to this, but parents want to support the sponsors that support their kids' sport, right? So how do you measure that? It's hard for business to know that for sure. That's why we have an app. We've partnered with Fancy. It's a great company. We're trying to find ways to drive people to businesses, but it is more than that. It's really that connection piece to say, I care about my community and I appreciate what you're doing for me and I want to give back to you as well. And I feel the same, Paul. I mean, I don't get excited about the old days when you see your logo in the newspaper. Maybe it's fun in your ad briefly, but when you see your kid, I'm sure you've seen this. You go to the grocery store, someone's walking around with a Capitus Consulting jersey on. It feels amazing, right? So there is branding there, but I think definitely the community knows that you care, and that comes back to your business in a positive way.
Although I remember the first game when I sponsored Ted, I was standing on the sideline and some parents beside me said, Capital's Consulting? Who the hell are they? I think they wanted Subway or Domino's Pizza. But boutique sports management consultancies weren't really what they had in mind. But so Ted, let's switch to because you've been, it's great to talk to you because you've got such a wide scope of perspective on this. But given you serve so many organizations, as you said, and you've been doing this to your credit, you started this before the pandemic, right? So you've been in this over the pandemic period and now on the other side. Can you tell listeners how the sponsorship market behaved, if differently at all, over the pandemic and how you see it behaving in this sort of, I guess we'll call it post-recovery period?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, one of the funny things that I often tell people is when I got into this business, you say, to leap into it is risky. And of course, any business is. But I thought, hey, minor sport, that is recession proof. We're good there. And then, of course, COVID comes and knocks us all back on our butts. But I think, it's understandably businesses were really quiet for a little more than a year. And so people weren't sure what to do. And there still is a bit of a malaise that has come from, not everybody has come back, but most businesses are coming back and they understand the value of the connection to minor sport. So I don't think a ton has changed other than the fact that unfortunately, a number of businesses are no longer in business. There are new businesses popping up. Just look in your community. How many new franchises have you seen? How many new businesses that weren't there before? So there's plenty of opportunity. That's never going to be the question. It really is just getting back and explaining them the value. And I guess the fact that traditional media is suffering in general, not to do with COVID specifically, but just in general, it's an opportunity for sponsorship to have a much more prominent piece of the landscape when it comes to marketing and promotion. So
yeah. Do you find, because I was watching it and listening very carefully to what sponsors were saying over the pandemic, and there was this big shift to supporting mental health and particularly in youth and some of the issues that were prominent around the pandemic period. And then you mentioned it in your comments a few moments ago, which sort of resonated with me, this notion that we're giving to our community unconditionally. So in other words, it's almost philanthropic for some organizations. We're not here to try to sell you anything or there's no catches. We just generally care about our community. Do you still get that sense, particularly with some of the bigger brands that aren't maybe so sales driven or product placement driven? There's a sense that we just want to help community, particularly in this cost of living crisis and this inflation crisis we find ourselves in here. We're not the big, bad, nasty corporation. We actually care about the people who buy our products and walk around our streets.
Absolutely. And if you look at a couple of businesses like Tim Hortons and Bank of Montreal, during the pandemic, they continued to, there was a small sort of pause, but they were quickly back because they understood, to your point, the need for minor sport to continue to survive. And they have, given without really asking for much in return. They just want to kind of be there and help and support, which clubs have definitely appreciated. And I think, it's going to be different with there are some examples, and I'm not going to name them, but sponsors that took the opportunity to walk away because the pandemic was there and they had their own concerns, which is the reality of life, right? But many have come back because they understand the value. We talk to so many businesses every day. We really get a sense of where they're at and what they want to do. And that connection piece is important. They definitely want to be a part of the community. And one of the guys that was on our team in the past would say that people go where they're invited. So it gives the sponsor a chance to say, either explicitly or implicitly, I'm supporting you, look forward to seeing you in my business someday, right? So it's a nice soft way to do it.
Yeah, and like I've been a coach on that sideline, and why would I go anywhere else if somebody's handing me a coupon and they,
Exactly.
the restaurant's 500 meters away and the owner's there? Of course, I'm
Right.
going to take the kids, and the kids are waving the coupon, and they want that hot dog. Like it sells itself, right? So no
Exactly.
question.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Tim Hortons and BMO, who've been tremendous servants for amateur sport for so long. But
Yes.
interesting when you unpack them, right, Ted? I mean, Tim Hortons brand is all about community. You watch any TV commercial, right? It's set in a community environment, whether it's a hockey rink or a soccer field or whatever it might be. So they're reinforcing their brand positioning. Bank of Montreal, well, what's the most attractive customer base for a bank? Young families, right? They can sell multiple
Correct.
loans to them for 30 or 40 years. Where are you going to find young families? In the sports and recreation infrastructure in municipalities, particularly in suburban districts of cities. So It makes sense, right? I mean, there's a method to the madness behind it. How much would you say that it's difficult? Because not every amateur soccer or sports organization or soccer club is a marketing agency. How do you sort of recommend that your clubs sort of try to understand that the thinking behind what goes into a sponsorship decision?
Yeah, I mean, because of the nature of what we do, we want to be the sponsorship arm for these clubs. So as often as we can, we say, let us handle it. And our club partners have been amazing. They trust us, which is a big part of what we're doing. And they allow us to kind of do what we need to do. So we really handle that stuff. And the clubs, and every club is different. But, in terms of helping us deliver, most of our clubs are very good. So the value the sponsor sees is easy for the club to kind of do their part. And so they really don't have to, there's not much the clubs have to do. But if we're looking at clubs that are not partnered with us and kind of want to do it on their own, it really is just talking to your client and identifying what do they want out of this, what are they looking for, and making sure you do that. They often are not looking for the world. They just want to have their logo put on properly. They want to get a copy of the schedule. And as you said, they just like to be asked. I can't tell you how many sponsors we've acquired from club partners who just didn't call that sponsor back. They said, well, we would have sponsored last year, but nobody ever called us, right? So there's a lot of that out there. If clubs just simply have somebody that wants to do it and calls them, they will get results.
Yeah, because I think sometimes we also assume that all business is, really big corporate business with really sophisticated marketing departments. A lot of these sponsors, Ted, particularly at a local community level, they're local small businesses trying to keep the lights on in their own organizations.
Correct.
And they're not they don't have sophisticated marketing strategies. But if you come up and say, look, I can put you in touch with your local customer base, they're going to listen, right?
Yes, that is certainly where we've had success. And I think, the advantage that we have is, as you said, we're professionals and we do this on a daily basis. So we kind of know what buttons to push. But also the audience is important too, right? When you can tell them, and this is all to the benefit of our partners because all the sponsored teams and events go to the club, we can tell them it's not just 18 kids, it's 20,000 families, right? So there's more weight behind it. But yeah, I think it's something that it can be done. It's just work. It's just sometimes you have to call the client 10 times before they finally say yes or no, right? Yeah. So it's just a lot of effort. Yeah,
it is. And I guess a question on the nature of sponsorship, because I'm really interested to get your opinion on what your advice would be for listeners on value in kind sponsorships, because obviously everyone wants cash, but there's lots of organizations out there saying, well, I can't give you cash, but I'll send you a couple of, crates of Gatorade or whatever it is, or whatever it might be. And what would your advice be on how sports organizations deal with approaches or offers around value in kind?
So I think it depends if you have a specific need. We were talking to a club yesterday, and they have their year-end party and they have a need for pizza. They're already spending money. Could we find a pizza sponsor? That actually saves that club money, right? So that is a bottom line benefit. But you will have clients, and some of the businesses are very smart. They understand that the value in kind is affordable for them, and they just want to put that out. And in most clubs, when you've got 20 other things to do, if someone says, here's 10 free cases of Gatorade, we say, sure, we'll take it. So I think clubs do undersell the value sometimes, which is what we can help with, because we understand when, there is a need for you, so we're going to accept this on your behalf. Or no, we should charge them. If they want to have access to the families, they should pay some sort of fee that goes to the bottom line of the club. So it really depends. Sometimes the value in kind is there. Sometimes it's really more for the sponsor, and it's kind of a unique way in. And we try to guard the gate if we can, because we really believe access to minor sports has a value, and that value has to be something the club wants. Which is what we do every day. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good to hear, because and I'm glad what you said, because sometimes you get this bright shiny object put in front of you and it's like, yeah, I'll take it, but the bottom line is, has it actually saved you money on the other end? So rather than making money, are you saving money through that product? Because as you say, some of these organizations are quite sophisticated, right? They'll make their product look like it's something that you really need, but you've got to be quite discerning, right? And it's good, as you say, you've got the expertise to be able to make that call, but there can be some sort of guerrilla marketing that goes in there in terms of just putting products in there that may be of no value to you. And sometimes might be you got to be careful, right? These are kids, if you're in youth sports, got to be careful what you're ponying up beside as a product.
Yeah, and most of the clubs are pretty strong in, one of the first things they say to us is, here are the sponsors you can't go to. And we say, we do this. We know we're not going to approach, cannabis or alcohol or anything along those lines. So we know who to go to, not to go to. But you're right. It really is. It's at the end of the day, sometimes it's just nice to have something. And when you're one person, I know I was a house league director, and that was my job for 3 or 4 weeks, and I wasn't getting paid for it, right? So there's a lot of work to do. So it's easy for a volunteer to say, oh gosh, I will take the free stuff, thank you, on to the next thing, right? But again, that's where we put almost $2 million back into minor sport. It's because we ask the tough questions, we knock on the doors, and we say, yeah, you can come through, but there's going to be a fee depending on the situation. So, but it's hard. It's hard for a club, again, filled with volunteers mostly, a few staff, to actually have the ability to do that. And there's also opportunities lost for businesses, because a club is not a media agency. They're not able to, as you asked earlier, how do you present yourself? How do you give the value? We can help them with that. Let's position it in this way. We can bring the dollars in, and that client will hopefully come back year after year if we do it properly.
I guess before I let you go, Ted, pointers in the market as we move forward, as we're in 2024 now. What advice or tips would you have into the future? Or do you have any sense as to how sponsorship is going to change, or do you think it's a very consistent phenomenon in the sports theater?
There certainly is consistency to sponsorship. And I think it's our biggest challenge is educating sponsors on what it means to be a sponsor, right? So, logo on a jersey, as we talked about, they get that. And if that's as deep as they think and that has value to them, then they'll do it, right? But if you can explain to a sponsor, and it is harder now with the credit crunch, and just businesses are still recovering. Businesses are right now in the process of paying back those loans that the government so nicely gave and allowed us to continue. But it is going to be harder. But there still is dollars out there, but businesses still have to market. And I think, it's going to be slower. We're finding it's not as good as it was back in 2019, but the speed is picking up. And it really, again, for us, Paul, is just more volume. We just have to knock on more doors. There's money out there. So really for a club, the recommendation is it's, people still want to sponsor. They want to be a part of it, offer a good product, price it properly, and just knock on as many doors as you have to. More doors have to be knocked on now, but the money is still there. And sponsors still want to connect because it still means something to them. That hasn't changed, right?
Yeah.
The world is kind of going back to what it was before in some ways, like it or not. But so I think they're slowly, once they have the funds, they certainly want to do it.
Yeah, great. Well, it's true. The same business dynamics exist, right? And irrespective of the short-term agitations in the system. So, Ted, please let my listeners know where they can get you if they'd like to contact you and see if they can have you represent them.
Yeah, you can. The simplest one to remember is you can email sponsorship at kidspired.ca, which is KIDSPIRED.ca. That will find its way back to someone on our team. And if you're a club that's looking for us to help you with sponsorship, or a manager looking to find some tips on how to approach sponsors, whatever it might be, reach out to that email and we will find our way back to you and help you the best that we can.
Yeah. And, Ted isn't sponsoring this podcast, guys. I'm taking no money from him. I honestly believe this is a fantastic offering he's giving. And I have clients of mine who they say all I hear from Ted is when he walks in the door and hands us a check, and that's actually how it works. So if you are struggling with the capacity to build an effective sponsorship program, and Ted is 100% right, I can tell you as somebody who's done this work, much of this is just simply rolling your sleeves up and getting in the market. That is hours and time that you may not have at your disposal. It doesn't mean you can't have the benefits of the sponsorship from your local business community, and certainly Kidspied is a great place to start. So Ted Gendron from Kidspied, thank you so much for joining me on the Regista Room today, and look forward to chatting you again in the future.
Thanks, Paul.
Want to tell us what you think of the show and things we could do to make it better? Tell us now at comments@registaroom.com.
Need help managing your amateur sport organization but don't know where to turn? Look no further than Capitus Consulting, your dependable partner to help you through the challenges and issues you routinely face in and around your sport boardroom. At Capitus Consulting, we're different. We've directly managed amateur sport organizations from community club to national governing body. We understand your side of the fence because we've been there ourselves. We know from experience what makes sport organizations successful and where they go wrong. Reach out to us today at capitusconsulting.ca and let's start building your sport business today.
So welcome back, and let's switch gears somewhat and move from corporate sponsorship to another form of revenue development that's heavily relied on in the charitable sector at large, but very underdeveloped in amateur sports, which is that, of course, of sport philanthropy. The 2022 Canadian Amateur Sport Health Check report I mentioned earlier in this podcast revealed that nearly 3/4 of Canadian community sport organisations have no structured donation program as part of their revenue model at all. Sure, you may point to the odd car chamois or bake sale that teams do from time to time to fundraise their team's trip to a tournament or what have you. But fund development that's structurally part of the club's capacity, as much as coaches are, for example, that drive constant donor-generated revenue to support the future of the club at large, it rarely exists. But look across the road at any arts organisation. You'll see this is central to their organisation's revenue model. So not-for-profits doing it, for some reason, sport is not. A number of years ago, Samantha Rogers spotted the significant weakness in the amateur sports system and decided to do something about it. With a background in fundraising in different sectors, including sport, she established Relate Social Capital and set about helping organizations build donor-driven fund development capability into their revenue generation skill sets. Importantly, and unlike what we've just heard from Ted at Kidspired, Relate isn't just an outsourced fundraising function. They don't fish, they teach their clients how to fish and give them the rods, tackle, and nets to do so when they are gone. I chatted with Samantha recently to discuss fund development in amateur sport, why it isn't done well or even at all, and how sports organizations can change that. Samantha Rogers from Relate Social Capital, welcome to the Regista Room.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's great to have you on, and this is an area that's kind of interesting that we're going to chat about today. I've always found that when it comes to development of social capital and particularly structured fundraising programs, that we seem to do a terrible job on amateur soccer in this. I'm not sure why. Do you note that as well? And do you have any reasons why this is kind of an underserved space?
I would definitely agree. I think, we're called Relate Social Capital specifically for that reason, just because I early on in my career realized that everything that I had ever sort of flourished into came from relationships. And so it became very evident to me, especially in the sports space, that for whatever reason, there was a gap within that system. And social capital really is just the value of your networks and how can you actually tap into that to try to build something sustainable and grow within the sports system.
Yeah, I mean, I know other sectors do this really well. Like the arts is really good at it. Universities are brilliant at it
Yes.
through alumni and so on. In sport, I wonder, is it just because we have this wonderful revenue line where we can sort of charge a fee for a program and there isn't really the need as much to get into this space as much as we think that might contribute at all?
I think so. And I think it seems almost counterintuitive within the sports space for some reason. I think a lot of the times, government steps in and helps within sport. And so it's almost created a bit of a handout mentality where we've just gotten into this space where, you charge a registration fee. It's always been done this way, and this is why we're going to keep operating in this manner. I came from the university space. That's how I got my start in sports. And when I looked at what was happening within the athletics department versus the rest of the university, and of course would compare down to the US because I always compare to the US and see, what comes out of the university space in terms of alumni and engagement and support, we are just lacking so much within that space. And knowing within sports, where do you have that is almost where you have the greatest camaraderie. But for whatever reason, we weren't tapping into that.
Yeah, it's curious to me. And you sort of look at it and you think there's almost this culture as well in sport that we shouldn't ask for things. There's kind of this culture of we should be constantly broke. Every discretionary cent we have, we should basically either program with it or discount our fees to make it, dangerously cheap so that when I say that, I mean that we can't afford it to run our operations. So there's this song almost like, I don't know if it's a Canadian thing as well, since we're in Canada, but there's this like, we're not worthy to ask money of you just to help us kind of thing, unless it's for a specific cause. So you see good fundraising around like sending teams to the US at a tournament or specific goal-based stuff, but just saying, look, give us money to keep this club going into perpetuity just seems to be lacking.
It's very odd. And especially as you mentioned that, so the major observations I made, especially coming from a background of working in the charitable space, was that when I found out, for example, that all of our national sport federations in Canada, and it is the exact same in the US, well, not the exact same, similar, exact same in Australia and other countries, was that for whatever reason, they can raise money and they can be seen as philanthropic, but they're not positioning themselves that way. Yet, as anybody who has a child in sport, who has played sport, that so much of your life comes down to fundraising. So it was this weird dichotomy that you would see that athletes are so inherently used to fundraising, but for whatever reason, we weren't really positioning sport philanthropically. So when I was, I worked in social services, I worked in healthcare, and then I, somewhat fell into sports when I realized that the benefits, and everybody, of course, listening and involved in sports could name them, and they're countless. But for whatever reason, we weren't utilizing that in a philanthropic way, just like any other industry is. And it's such an odd space to be in, but there is so much potential there. And essentially that's how I got started, was wondering, why are we not actually fundraising if you're able to issue tax receipts and you are able to live in this space and what you are doing has a huge community impact? Why are we sitting back and just, trying to grab whatever breadcrumbs we can?
Well, it's great that you've taken the plunge into the jungle, so to speak, as I have in a different area of sport, and are actually trying to do something about this. So kudos to you, and that's kind of a good segue. Maybe you can just give us just a little Cole's notes on what you do at Relate, and for clubs who are looking at getting into more structured. I call it social capital development rather than fundraising, because I think people just tend to think this is just about getting checks in, and it's not really, is it? As you'll explain, I'm sure it's more about creating things that are much more deeper and robust than that. But how do you add value to your clients, and what could people expect from you in that respect?
Right. So thank you, because I really do not like the word fundraising. I don't like the word nonprofit. I think it just puts us in this very sort of draconian space. There's nothing innovative about it. And so essentially, as I said,
it's almost benevolent, isn't it? Like, please, here we are with our cup out. Please help us. And we're in this.
Exactly. Yeah. I really believed, even from when I was in school, that engagement precedes investment. So no one's just going to give to you because you have your hand out. And if they do, it might be a little bit, but it's not sustainable. But in a lot of different fundraising spaces, whether it's hospital fundraising, university fundraising, as I experienced, they have, quotas and goals, and it almost feels sales-like. But that does not work, in my opinion. I certainly don't think it works in sports. And so I set off on this belief that if engagement precedes investment, how do we really build out that engagement piece? And then naturally will the philanthropic support come. And it does take longer for sure, but it is a lot more sustainable and it does work. And so to your point, I don't like to use the term fundraising. We'll typically say fund development and engagement, and really putting the emphasis on the engagement piece to build out everything that you need to get started. And then eventually you'll see the investment come.
So when organizations are looking at getting a foothold on this, do you recommend that they start around a campaign around a capital build or some sort of a component to their organization that is material and might be close to people's heart? Or should they look at something bigger and just say, look, this is about building a sustainable future for our club. We want you to give to the club in some sort of fund with the ultimate goal of an endowment or whatever it might be. Like, how do you get started on this in a way that people don't maybe face some early setbacks and then give up? Because I'm sure you see that a lot.
They run, yes. I think what happens is they'll get whoever it is, honestly, anywhere will typically get pressure to say, just raise money, just start somewhere, just, throw up a fundraising campaign, whatever it looks like. And then that typically doesn't see results. And then it just creates this cycle of, we tried, it failed, it's not worth our time. And so that's why the biggest question we were asked is, where do we start? And a lot of it, I come back to, you have to have an engaged community, because trying to fundraise from people who are disengaged or people who are not that familiar with what you're doing is just going to put you into this cycle. So it's really just saying, okay, is our community engaged? What are we currently doing in terms of engaging them in terms of fund development? Is it working? What hasn't been working? What is our community telling us? And really, no matter what, you can probably put together some type of, whether it's an alumni committee, whether it's a parent committee, some type of group that can just start to look at that and say, okay, where do we start? And is it just having, some type of social event? Is it just putting out a survey to find out what is our community looking for from us? Because, depending on what type of group you're working with, if it's a federation, you'll typically have disgruntled athletes. That's always the case. I've never come across one that doesn't have, some bad feelings somewhere along those lines that need to be repaired. You'll have a lot of passion. And so how do you tap into that space? And so by tapping into that space, then you can start to create, okay, we have to focus on engagement with our eyesight to eventually be able to raise money. And then if we are going to raise money, a big piece to your point is, what are we raising money for? To go into a capital build, yes, for the most part, a lot of times that's necessary, but that's a very big undertaking, especially if you don't have an engaged community. So is it, just doing a basic audit of understanding, like, okay, we need more equipment, we need to be able to subsidize fees for certain athletes. Do we need to provide for travel? Like, what are those areas? And then actually putting price tags to them, because if you go out and say, hey, we're trying to raise $50,000, we're trying to raise $25,000, depending on your community, that could be very intimidating. So actually trying to take off some bite-sized pieces, like, what can $25 do? Because if someone understands, I only have $25, but I actually can have an impact, that's a great place to start.
Yeah, just ask Bernie Sanders. What was the average? Remember his campaign back? Average donations $26 or something like that.
True. And a lot of times, if when you live in a bigger fundraising space, whether it's a university or a hospital, you'll see there are so many stories of some older woman who was giving $25 every year and then left $1 million in their will. And so I think sometimes people are quick to write off certain things, but it is so crucially important to be able to say, $25 will impact us, because if we have 100 people giving $25, that is going to eventually add up. So it's just looking at that space of trying not to bite off more than you can chew, but also making it very digestible for your community.
Yeah, I saw one club where just put this huge drywall with like bricks on it, and you could buy a brick. That was the deal, right? And you actually signed your brick, and then it was great. People actually could feel materially that they're contributing, even if it's one brick or 10 or So it's sometimes there's an emotive piece to this, isn't there? Which the best fundraising campaigns do.
One of my favorite campaigns was an NCAA women's basketball program that was looking to do renovation on their locker room. So they actually did a crowdfunding campaign, and they created it into a very engaging online shopping. So do you want to buy them a microwave? Do you want to buy a locker? Do you want to buy a fan? Do you want to buy, a shower stall? Do you want to buy a fridge? And you can just go through and add that in, and then just, you check out and your total is X amount of dollars. But it really makes you feel as if you're participating in it and you're actually helping to build this and be able to contribute in a really meaningful way.
So I'm hearing know your community and make sure you've got at least a component of the community that's engaged and passionate enough to want to do this. Know your cause, personalize the campaign. What about managing it into perpetuity? Where does this sit, would you say, in terms of a club's structure, particularly those that don't have big staff or big payroll?
Right. And these are great things. So when I talk to most organizations, I always emphasize how incredible your volunteers can be. We're so lucky in sports that we have, the whole entire system is essentially built by volunteers and run by volunteers, to the point where in some cases, I'm overwhelmed by the alumni and volunteers I work with because they are so engaged and so excited. I can't keep up with them. So I'd be looking at, who are some of the people that could actually work with you in that space. Where there's a huge drop off is you get to the point, you raise the money, you're successful at it, and then you never talk to these people again, or you don't thank them properly. And so a great volunteer opportunity is saying, hey, we had 120 people donate to this campaign. Can you send thank you cards? Can you call them? And it's very simple to do. Whether you break it off into really manageable chunks that, everybody sends 20 thank you cards, but just something that simple becomes very relevant. And that always seems to be where there's a break in what I would say is the sustainability of it, because now you've brought people in, which just in sales, it's harder to get a new customer than it is to retain one. Yes. And so now you've brought someone in, now we're trying to work on that retaining piece. And it's just being able, like I said, call them, have your athletes call them, send thank you cards. It's very simple. And then you then have to now manage those donors as well, right? So whether it's, depending on your budget, it could be an Excel spreadsheet, or you can actually have a proper CSR database that you're able to then manage everyone. And then that's when you look into the sustainability of it. Like, okay, are we going to try to fundraise twice a year? We go back to those same people, but we have to make sure that we're thanking them. And, like best practices, people will say you have to have at least 7 sort of non-soliciting touch points with a donor, but whether that's a thank you email and then a thank you card, whatever it is that you can manage, just at least please make sure to thank them one time and not ask for more money in that thanking.
Yeah, that drives me mad for the stuff I support, when I all I get is just loads of more asks, and you're like, why did I give in the first place? Yeah.
Well, we call it tasking, because especially when I took over at McGill and I was looking into what was happening, I was realizing that most of the teams were just sending out one solicitation a year. So it was a thank you and an ask, which becomes problematic. And I wouldn't recommend asking the same community more than twice a year for funds.
Yeah. You've obviously seen a lot of good examples of this. Can you think of an example of where in particular a sport organization, somewhere has done a pretty good job of this that listeners might be able to sort of relate to?
Yeah, I'd say, again, one example, and I don't need to name all the different sports, but worked with a group who had 0 donors. And, we ran a campaign and they raised $50,000 and had, I think it was just over 100 donors. Now, mind you, I was coming from a world where we're running a $1.5 billion campaign and we have hundreds of thousands of donors. But I was so excited because I thought to go from 0 donors to just over 100 is incredible, because that to me was incredible. 60,000 or upwards of $60,000, incredible. Even in some cases, we've run campaigns where it was 50 donors and they raised $12,000, and I thought, but that's exciting, because if you're going from a place that you've never tried this before, you have to have really manageable goals. And the fact that you're on your first time, even if it's 20 donors, like you will grow. And I think that's where people start to get a bit discouraged, is that it doesn't happen overnight. One group that we've worked with, it's been, I want to say 7 years that they started. They had 0 donors, again, raising, $20,000. And now they're raising almost annually over $100,000. And they have consistent donors that are coming in, between 100 and 200 donors that they have each year. So it does happen. It's just managing your expectations and knowing that it's not going to necessarily happen overnight. And, one of our favorite stories is the Australian Sports Foundation. They were, even I think 6 years ago, raising 35 million annually, and now they're on track to be close to 90 million this year, which is incredible. And it just really shows the opportunity. It's just a matter of, it's a lot of work, because we're having to shift mindsets in sports, and also in terms of seeing it philanthropically, and then also have to put into place a lot of, systems that have never been there before. So
100%. 100%. No, well, I'm really glad you used the examples of organizations getting started in this, because it takes a lot of courage. I think there's probably leadership in there that was really responsible for that.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of a cultural thing, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, these organizations that build sustainability, they build a culture of giving to be the norm, right? Rather than something that's, of course, a one-off cause or an abnormal thing to do or an unreasonable thing to do, as we've discussed. So that's pretty interesting. The other thing I would just say, in terms of, you mentioned organizations that have managed to double, triple their giving campaigns. Have they done that through just taking a sort of a scaled out approach to it, so we have more people asking for more, or have they changed the cause that are asking for? How do you scale up like on that basis?
It's a great question. I would say a lot of it is, your first time is kind of a real shot in the dark. And then you're looking at, okay, who is involved? And I think sometimes too, with donors in the space, they might be a little bit weary, right? So one example was, with this group we were working with, we were raising monies for a very specific piece, right? Like we were buying boats for Special Olympics programming. So it's a very tangible thing. But of course, there's going to be some apprehension if we've never done this before. And so we built it. Okay, so you had some people, like they love to say, like in business, like some early adopters, people who were just, really into it, had a lot of faith in it. Some people who were kind of like, not sure, people sometimes are skeptical of federations and clubs and organizations, thinking they're taking the money, it's not going where they're saying it's going. And so, but again, it's just sticking to the strategy. So we're raising the money, we're bringing it in, we're immediately thanking the donors, we're sending thank you cards, we're telling them, we're so excited because we raised X amount of dollars, we can buy X amount of boats. Now, we are not done yet, because we have to go actually buy those boats, and we have to get those boats in the water, and we have to get the athletes in the water, in the boats. And so when we had that gave us another opportunity to go back to the donors and see, we told you we are actually using the money. We're buying this many boats. Here are the boats. Here are the athletes in the boats. And so the following year, when we did the campaign again, as sort of part of this ongoing legacy piece, is we're now able to sort of trade on that good social capital that we built, and then we're able to go back to people. So then inevitably we raise more money, see more donors back into it, and then that's eventually how it grows.
Yeah.
You have to, again, it's a process. It's not just, you build it and they will come. The other thing is, you mentioned too, when you have the peer-to-peer asking, I could ask for the money, but who am I to these individuals, right? It's so much easier when it's a former teammate who's asking, when it's a former athlete who's asking, when it's a current athlete who's involved in it, because there's a lot more that attachment piece to it and familiarity. And so that's also a great thing too, right? Is that you have to look at it like if it's a coach who asks for it, or if it's, as I said, it's a former teammate or a former medal winner, whoever it may be.
So around the foundation of sort of community and cause and the stuff we spoke earlier, I'm hearing, be courageous and patient, right?
Yes.
Stick to it. You're changing a culture here. You're not just asking for money. And then for the sustainability piece, I'm hearing you talk a lot about it. Really moves to a customer relationship management project, right? Where you've got a database, you've got to make sure you show value, keep a very clear understanding and record of how you're approaching these people and for what, and just sort of cultivate it from there, right? That's really probably the best word. Yeah. Well, look, Samantha, I mean, more power to you for doing this. And listeners, it's not that hard. It's not that hard. Samantha just showed you. If you want more, you should be in touch with her. Contact her at samantha@relatesocialcapital.com. Samantha will be more than happy to talk to you about your organization and see how she can help you set up your own systems to develop your own social capital and build sustainability into what you do, allowing you to get on with the business of amateur soccer. But until then, Samantha, thank you so much for joining me in the Regista Room today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Hey, amateur soccer club leaders. Are you looking for a complete reference on how to run a great amateur soccer club, but all you can find are books on how to coach kids? Introducing Amazon's #1 bestseller, Don't Blame Your Soccer Parents, your complete guide on how to run a successful amateur soccer club, covering everything from managing your boardroom to overseeing your director of coaching or raising corporate sponsorship. Based on real-world experiences from internationally renowned sports consultant and professional speaker Paul Varian, Don't Blame the Soccer Parents rolls its sleeves up and tackles all the hands-on club management issues you need to master. Governance, planning, staffing, volunteers, finance, technical oversight, marketing, evaluation, and more. You'll find it all in the most comprehensive soccer club management reference on the market today. Pick up your copy on the Amazon platform or at don'tblamethesoccerparents.com today.
So there it is. In spite of the pandemic charging through the sponsorship and fund development market like a wrecking ball, things seem to be returning to normal in terms of corporations continuing to see value in positioning their brands next to the sport business and donors continuing to support sports cause. That said, I'd say a few things have changed since we could take those face-sweaty masks off, and for the better. Firstly, amateur sport has truly started to understand its intrinsic link to community life and embrace it as the shattering value that it is. Corporations find it hard to generally get close to community because it's difficult to be a person of the people if you're in a level 50 downtown corner office wearing a 10K three-piece suit. Amateur sport just dances into community, and the planning work I've been doing with sports clubs recently is now heavily geared to community value add, which is great. Secondly, I'm still not convinced that sports clubs out there fully understand how powerful this connection to community is, and that they can monetize it if some proper staff expertise is put behind it. Samantha also heavily reinforced this notion as being central to donor cultivation as well. Thirdly, both sponsorship and donor-driven fund development are wonderful ways to bring new expertise into your sports organization. It doesn't matter if people don't know the technicalities of your sport, they just need to know how to identify business and community value and capture and monetize it. As I mentioned earlier, I got into this industry through skills in selling corporate sponsorship, not through my knowledge of sport or through any athletic prowess. Giving opportunities for people with strong sales and fund development skills to get into your organization that they are passionate fans of is a good thing for everyone, so utilize that opportunity. And finally, remember, neither sponsorship nor philanthropic fund development is a simple ask for money. You're asking people to be vested in your club, and that takes the cultivation and maintenance of relationships and the patience to do so. If you're serious about moving into these areas of revenue development, don't go about it in a half-assed way. Put resources behind it and be patient. And if you're looking for a good place to start, as I said before, take a look at my e-tutorial on how to raise sports sponsorship. It gives you a complete step-by-step process to do it, and the 2022 Canadian Amateur Sport Health Check report has market rates for sports sponsorship and across the Canadian amateur sports system that you can avail of while benchmarking your prices. It's all there at capituslearning.com. Go there now, start tapping into corporate sponsorship revenues that are just waiting to be enhanced. You're in the Regista Room, the podcast where amateur soccer goes off-field. As always, it's been my pleasure to be with you today. Thanks for listening. And until the next episode, wherever you're tuning in from around the world, stay safe and stay well.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Regista Room, where amateur soccer goes off-field. Join us again for the next episode. Subscribe today at capituslearning.com or listen wherever you access your favorite podcasts.